Today we're going to talk about solving quadratics by factoring. Now, taking the notes and filling them in is going to be part of your grade, so you need to make sure that you either download this copy and fill it in, or you can do this on your own paper. If you do it on your own paper, please make sure you put the title and then you write the question before you show me all the work. Okay, so when I tell you to solve quadratics by factoring, what I actually mean is to find the x-intercepts. Remember, x-intercepts go by three different names: zeros, roots, and solutions. Well, solving, that's why they're called solutions. There's other ways to find the solutions, but today we're going to learn the first one, which is factoring. Now, factoring is whenever you take a problem that has two or three terms, so something like this, and turning it into its two sets of parentheses. Now, once you have these two things multiplied together equals 0, you're going to come over here and say x minus 3 equals 0, skip some space, and then put x plus 4 equals 0. Now I'm going to explain exactly why here in just a second. This first problem, I just want to show you how. So you factor the problem and you set both factors equal to 0. Then from here, all you would have to do is solve for x. So I use the opposite sign. I add 3 to both sides right here. That gives me x equals positive 3. On this one, I can subtract the 4, the opposite of positive 4, which leaves me with x equals negative 4. And remember, these are representing the x-intercepts. So I'm going to come over here, because you can check your answer in your calculator, and do x minus 3 times x plus 4. Hit my graph button, and I can see we're crossing at positive 3 and negative 4. So the way that I want you to write your answers is like this. You're going to put one of these little brackets, put your answers, and then close the brackets. One thing I really want you to understand is that the squiggly lines are not the same thing as a set of parentheses, okay? When they give you squiggly lines, this is not an ordered pair, an x and a y value. These are both x-intercepts, so this is a list of our solutions. Okay, so why did that work? Let's back up for a second right here. Okay. Now, if I gave you this problem, 2 times x equals 0, well, there's only one number that x could be, because anytime you multiply two numbers together and your answer is 0, then that means one of the numbers that you multiplied by would have to be a 0. So that's how I know x is 0. Why does that help us? Because of this. When you cross the x-axis, your y value is always 0. So if I've been given this problem and I want to find the x-intercepts, first thing I do is I replace the y with a 0. Then from here, I can factor the trinomial. So factoring is when you list the numbers that multiply to give you the constant, the last number, and choose the pair that adds to give you the middle number, negative 5. So I factored that problem, and then from here, you would do the same thing that I just showed you on example number 1. You would set them both equal to 0 and then finish solving. Okay? And if you look, I've got the solution, negative 2, positive 7, matches right up like this. Now, if you're not good at drawing those squiggly lines, I understand. It's okay if you just do something like this. That's good enough for me. I understand what you mean. So now let's go back to our paper, our notes, and start filling in example 2. Now, this one has also already been factored for us because I have parentheses in here. Now, the 5n doesn't have any parentheses around it, but because it's squished right up against this set of parentheses, that just means multiplying. So it is kind of like we've got an imaginary set there. So I'm going to put 5n equals 0 and 3n minus 2 equals 0. Okay, so I need to finish solving for the letter. On this first one, the 5 is squished right up against my n, so in order to finish solving, I would divide both sides by 5. 5 over 5 is 1, so I've got 1n. 0 divided by 5 is 0. Now, this next problem is a two-step equation. If you're trying to get the letter by itself, you've got to move the number that's not attached first. So I'm going to do plus 2 to each side. So I have 3n is equal to 2. I've got another step right here because I do have a number still attached to my letter. I divide both sides by 3, n equals. So I'm going to come over here, double check in your calculator, 2 divided by 3. I get that, so math enter, that is 2/3. So for my final answer, I'd come over here and draw my little brackets. And there's my answer. Now, it doesn't matter to me which one of the numbers you put first. If you put 2/3 first and 0 second, that is perfectly fine. Okay, now for example number 3, this one has not been factored for us this time. We don't have our sets of parentheses. But I've got a trinomial, 1, 2, 3 terms without a leading coefficient, so no number in front of the a squared. When that happens, you are supposed to take the factors of the last number, -24. So our little calculator trick on this one was to do -24 divided by x and then look at the table. So this will give me a list of my factors, 1 in -24, 2 in -12, 3 in -8, 4 and -6. Now if I keep scrolling, the next time it's not a decimal, it's 4 and 6 again, so I've got all of my numbers. Now, because we've got a negative constant, that means we have to have one positive number and one negative number. Well, remember, it could also be the other way around. Now, I am going to look for the pair of factors, waiting for it to unfreeze. There we go. I am looking for the pair of factors that adds to equal 5. So I would choose -3 plus 8. So when I come over here and do my factors, I've got a minus 3, let me fix that, and a plus 8 equals 0. Okay, so I factored this problem. Now we're going to add in the new part where you are actually solving for the x-intercepts. Take each one of your factors, a minus 3 and a plus 8, you set them both equal to 0. I always draw my lines, have my arrows pointing at my letter. So now I've got to solve the one-step equations. For this first one, I add 3 to each side so that we have a is equal to positive 3. On the next one, I subtract 8 from each side, and that gives me a equals negative 8. So for my final answer, I'm going to put them together, positive 3 and negative 8. Now that is the first kind of factoring that we learned how to do, but there is another type of factoring that you are going to have to remember. Okay, number 4. This one has 1, 2, 3 terms with a leading coefficient. So this time we do have that number in the front. Well, that is going to change some stuff for us because now we've got to multiply the first and the last numbers together, which gives us negative 56, and we take the factors of that. Okay. So, negative 56 divided by x, if I come over here, I've got 1 in negative 56, 2 in negative 28, I have 4 and negative 14, and if I keep going, I've got 7 and negative 8. Now, my negative signs could be on the other numbers over here, but I'm not going to bother writing that out because I already see the pair that I want. 7 and negative 8 add to give me negative 1. Now, I know that there's not actually a number written right there, but when the x, that middle term, doesn't have a number, you put a 1. That's why I knew it needed to add to be negative 1. So now I've got x plus 7 and x minus 8. Okay. Now, because we have that leading coefficient, that does add in some extra steps. Now I've got to take that 2 and divide each one of my numbers by it. Okay. If you get a decimal, you need to change it back to a fraction. So 7 over 2, math enter, enter, it stays 7 over 2. Sometimes it will reduce though, so you should check. Now, negative 8 divided by 2 gives me a negative 4. So now I've got this, and I've got one more step to finish factoring it. Whatever number is on the bottom, if you still have a fraction, the denominator number needs to move in front of the x. So 2x plus 7 times x minus 4, and this equals 0. I went ahead and put the 0 back on because we finally finished factoring that guy. Okay, so now that you've got it factored, we put 2x plus 7 equals 0, and x minus 4 equals 0. So first step on this one, I've got to move the friend, so that means I'm moving the number that's not attached to my letter. I subtract 7 from each side. 2x now equals negative 7. When you've got that 2 attached to your letter, the way that you get rid of it is to divide. And you always should double check and see if this is going to change to a decimal. So negative 7 over 2, math enter, enter, turns back to the fraction. Negative 7 over 2. On the one next to it, all I've got to do is add the 4 to each side, and we have x equals 4. So my answer is negative 7 over 2 and 4. Now, before I do the final example, I want to add something in right here because I want to see how many people are actually listening all the way through the notes. So if you have made it this far, I would like for you to go up to the top of your paper, the top right-hand corner, draw me a little smiley face right there. Okay, last one, number 5. This one also has 3 terms. It's got 1, 2, 3 terms with the number in front, so with a leading coefficient. I'm going to multiply the first and the last numbers together. That gives me 18. So I need to find the factors of 18. So when I do this, it could be 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. And I can see right away that none of those are going to add to be negative 19, because if I add 1 and 18, well, that gives me the positive. But that's because you need to remember something else. Go above the error message. If you've got a positive number like this, you could also be multiplying 2 negative numbers together, because a negative 1 times negative 18 is positive 18, but when we add those 2 numbers together, we get negative 19, that middle number right there. So that is why we chose this pair. It adds to equal negative 19. So come over here, put your parentheses, x minus 1 and x minus 18. Since it is 1 with a leading coefficient, now we've got to divide by that number. So it's the 1 in front, I divide by 3. Okay, so negative 1 over 3, when I change that back, it's going to stay as a fraction, just like this. So I end up with x minus 1/3. And for the other one, negative 18 divided by 3 is negative 6. So I've got x minus 6. Since I still have a fraction in my problem, the way that you finish factoring is to take the denominator, the bottom number of the fraction, and move it in front of that x. So that we have 3x minus 1 times x minus 6. We finished factoring it, so now I'm going to put the equal 0. Okay, now from this step, what you need to do is take each one of those sets of parentheses and set them equal to 0. So now I've got some 2-step problems. First thing I need to do is move the friend over, so plus 1 to each side. I've got 3x is equal to positive 1. And when I finish this up by dividing both sides by 3, I end up with x equals 1/3. For the next problem, I add the 6 to each side. This one's just going to be a 1-step, so x equals 6. That means my final answer for this one, I have 1/3 and 6. Now, if you are still feeling very rusty on factoring, I am going to upload another quick video that reminds you of all of those factoring rules. Make sure that you upload this assignment. It is something that you are going to be graded on.